Welcome, everybody, to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. My name is Tom Holt. I'm a professor here in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University. And I'm also the director for the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training. And I'm here with my two excellent co-hosts, as always. I'll let you two introduce yourselves.
I'm Dr. Rachel McNealey. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice here at Michigan State, and I'm an associate with the center.
Hello, I'm Dr. Taylor Fisher. I am a postdoc here at Michigan State, and I too am an associate of the center.
Excellent. Well, as you know, the purpose of the show is to bring people on. We talk about cybercrime and cybersecurity issues. Our goal is to try to make these issues understandable for the general public, to talk about things maybe that you've never heard of before, or to touch on issues that maybe you're familiar with, but from a different angle, and to try to help bridge the gaps that exist, because we're social scientists, but we talk about technical problems. We are really interested in understanding what law enforcement and practitioners do and try to get everybody on the same page, because cybercrime is one of these global problems that no matter how much you think you understand it, there's an angle that you don't. There's some new iteration of a problem that we need to understand. And today's guest, I think, is really going to help us with this issue. He's been in cybercrime and cybersecurity issues for a really long time. His name is Max Kilger. He's a professor of practice in management science and statistics at the University of Texas San Antonio, and he's also a founding member of the HoneyNet Project, which is a global cybersecurity research concern, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with Max as we go. But one of the things that we always try to do is think a little bit about an issue that is near and dear to our guest's heart. And one of those issues today is with hacking in particular, and nation states especially. And with nation states, it's always so complicated because we can think we know how nation states operate, but they can change on a dime. And they have specializations in areas that maybe you've never thought about before, and they operate differently from the average economically motivated hacker. So, I don't know, Taylor, when you think of a nation state sponsored hacker, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Yeah, one thing that always comes to mind with nation state is secrecy, right? And the need to be quiet and to cover your tracks. It's a unique form of hacking, I would argue, where your goal is to see what you can see without getting caught. And so you may not have an end goal in place, you may not have a specific target, you may just be looking for information, and maybe you do have a specific target, but ultimately, right, with nation state hacking, it's don't let them know you're there. And I think that, technical component of the hack is really unique to nation states.
Mm-hmm. Most of what I know about it is from a book called This Is How the World Ends by Nicole Perlroth. Highly recommend. But essentially getting into the zero-day market of nation states. So identifying and selling zero-day exploits, which are kind of holes in a system that the owner, the manager, hasn't patched yet, essentially. And it's wild. It's absolutely, the subtitle of the book is The Cyber Arms Race, Cyber Weapons Arms Race. And it's just kind of this black market for a long time that merged espionage with cybersecurity and, military industrialism. And so I think it's absolutely fascinating how many realms it encompasses when we talk about nation-state hacking.
And I tend to think of a different kind of hacker. I almost think of a person being at a desk as opposed to the hacker in his apartment or his house. It's more like a 9-to-5-ish kind of thing. And I know that that's weird, but I tend to think of them more as working professionals as opposed to criminals engaged in different types of hacking and stuff like that. The methods, the tactics, there's so much similarity there, but I tend to think of them in a very different light than I do the average economic hacker, and I can't fully say why that is. It's just the idea that's kind of built up in my mind over time.
Yeah, it's like almost like your perception defines the criminality, right? If it's not my nation, then it's illegal, it's criminal, it's bad. But if it's my nation doing it, we're just looking for information, right? We just need intel on our enemies.
Now we're getting into symbolic interactionism over here.
And this is the perfect time to bring in our guest. Max is a professor at UTSA, as I mentioned. Max is a guy who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a very long time. I remember when I was just starting doing my dissertation, I just heard of the HoneyNet project in around 2003. This was shortly after they had really gotten a whole lot of groundswell. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really cool. I hope I someday get to work with these guys because it seems awesome. And then lo and behold, I was able to. So let's bring in our guest, Max.
Hi, thanks for inviting me here today. So wonderful to be here. People often ask me, what do I do? And it's sort of difficult to describe, but often I say, well, my mission is to help develop a new, better, more comprehensive understanding of the relationships between people and digital technology from a national security perspective. That kind of says it all.
So what got you into cybercrime in particular and hacking especially?
Okay. So first of all, I've been coding for 55 years, a really long time. Yeah. And then I went to graduate school at Stanford in Silicon Valley during the personal computer revolution. It was an incredible, priceless education, hanging out in the SIG groups and the computer surplus stores and things like that. And my original plan, my dream was to teach and research at the university level, to talk about how computers and digital technology were changing the way that we work, we play, improve our lives in a positive way. And also because I realized how low professor salaries were. It was actually, I should probably maybe do the corporate rubber chicken circuit because this is really hot stuff and corporations are interested in that. But something happened and I ended up studying the dark side of digital technology instead of the happy, positive side. Now, a colleague of mine, Julie Albright at USC, she ended up doing what I was going to do, following this happier path. She's doing a great job. She wrote this fabulous book, Left to Their Own Devices, which talks about all the things that digital technology is doing to change how we live and work. Happy for me, her, and happy for me that I took the 90-degree turn. That's sort of the summary of how I got into cyber in general.
So I mentioned the HoneyNet project. Can you tell people what that is all about?
Sure. The HoneyNet project is a 25-year-old not-for-profit international security research organization working for the public good. Nobody gets paid. Each year we hold a workshop somewhere in the world. This year it's in Prague from June 2nd to 4th. And we bring in global experts from all over the world, HoneyNet project members and some non-members. And our mission is to sort of educate people. We keep the conference fees really low since we're a nonprofit, and we do training, we do workshops, and we've also done, in the early days, we did a lot of pro bono work, and we developed lots and lots of technologies. We were almost the original honeypot guys, but not quite. There were a few folks that came before us, but we really sort of developed that technology, and we developed millions and millions of dollars worth of technology, and we gave it all away for free. Yeah.
So what's a honeypot for the average listener who doesn't know? Can you explain it?
Sure, of course. It's basically a computer that's online somewhere, and it's waiting to be attacked. And it sits there and it waits, and unknown to the attackers are some very secret, quiet things hiding in the operating system kernel that basically record everything that the attacker does, how they attack it, what files they send. Often they'll start a chat room and record that stuff. So everything they do, we get a record of so that we can analyze how they did it, what their tactics were, what their motives were. And we basically created the software for free and gave it away. And now, even to this day, organizations all over the world run, huge networks of honeypots just waiting to get hit.
So, how did you wind up working with them, given you are a social scientist by training?
Well, so I had that inkling at Stanford. I really wanted to do this. And one day I saw this blog about talking about motivations and mindsets of hackers, and I read about it, and it was happened to have been authored by Lance Spitzner, who was the founder of the HoneyNet project. And I contacted him and I said, well, this is interesting, but I have a slightly different perspective, so being a social scientist. And so we chatted for a while, and he goes, oh, you know coding? Yeah. You know pretty good privacy? Yeah. I said, oh, well, why don't you join our merry band of 7 guys in a basement? And I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. And that's essentially how it got started.
So when we're looking at honeypots and, from all of your experience working with them, we know that attacks are partially human, partially tech. So from your experiences, can you talk to how much of this behavior, how much of this behavior can social scientists kind of contribute to the understanding?
Well, I think it sort of depends. I mean, the bot stuff, it's automated. It's not that interesting or exciting. It's basically pound on the server with a hammer until it squeaks or move on to the next one. But the really interesting stuff are the slow and low attacks that you see often from hackers associated with nation states. And there's really a lot that you can learn about their motivations and their behaviors from watching what they do.
How have you seen it changed since you started working on it? Like, what kinds of different things are we seeing now?
Well, it's kind of interesting. That's a good question. I started out studying the hacker community when I was there, and basically this many years later, one day I sat down and said, well, I've seen it evolve over time. And it's really interesting. And one of the first things I did was say, well, I'd really like to figure out what's the social structure of the hacking community. But you can't just walk up to some hacker and say, hey, tell me about your social structure. Yeah, that's probably not going to work too well. But, and I spent about 6 months tearing my hair out, going, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And then one day I came across the mother lode. I found the jargon file. Do you guys know the jargon file? I said, oh, this is interesting. They're sort of writing down their entire culture and history in a file, which eventually became a book. And so I basically did content of analysis of it and came up with a number of social forces or factors, structural elements inside that. And then 10 years later, it was still around. It was almost ready to die. And I did it again. And I saw how things changed over time. And that was really incredibly interesting. In the old days, the early hacker days, things like magic were important parts of the hacking community. And you even saw them in official Sun OS manuals. These are the magic numbers. This is how you use them. And as you went on over time, basically things like religion and magic and things like that disappeared from the hacking community. I began thinking about that, going, well, what's really happening? And what happened was that we saw this injection of money into the hacking community. All of a sudden, the hacker said, oh, wow, this dude at IBM says, I can get paid $60,000 a year for doing stuff I'm doing for nothing. Well, that sounds good. And just, like the age-old, age out in criminal behavior, basically they found a spouse, a dog, a house, a mortgage, etc., and off they went. But a small part spun off, and they became the cybercrime community. And so I said, oh, there are epics here. There's the hacking epic. And the hacking community went up, it peaked, and then went down. Now it's on the downside. And now we're in Epic 2, which is the cybercrime community, which is still building and growing and expanding and becoming more complex. And at that point, I sort of asked myself, okay, well, the magic question is, what's the third epic? And, so looking at folks from the social movement theory, Harriet Harang and Nancy Whitaker, and what's his name? I can't remember this social movement, father of social movements. Name escapes me. Shame. But anyway, I looked at that stuff. I said, okay, maybe I can take this stuff and apply it to what's happening in the digital domain and figure out what's next. And what I figured out what might be next potentially is the emergence of a cyber terror movement or community. And basically, I wrote a book chapter about it, ended up in the Army War College book of some sort. And so that was really interesting to sort of be able to see that evolution happen.
No, I think it's one of those things. I think we opine, at least I opine a lot on our podcast about the forgotten nature of human behavior and all of this. And when people hear cybersecurity, they think tech, networks, coding, etc. But you're talking about culture, like a Rosetta Stone of an online culture. And I think in the moment that seems very, maybe, not super culturally relevant, but I think that's something that years down the road we look back and say, that's a look at how these people were interacting.
So why do you think cyber terror is the next epoch?
Because just thinking about, well, which way is it going to go? And so you have cybercrime, and cyber terror have links and overlaps. And we know from Nancy Whitaker's work, she talks about how social movements spin off other social movements. And that looking at sort of what was out there, looking at sort of movements and trends inside the social domain and looking at things like Syria and other places, it was like, this is probably where it might go. And another reason for that was basically the work that we did, Tom, on the civilian cyber warrior, right? So basically try to figure out what were motivations for people to attack a country. And basically what we thought about the civil survivors, in the bad old days before the internet, if you were a citizen of country A and then country B did something bad that hurt your citizens, what would you do? Oh, you'd write a letter to the president of country B. You're a bad person. You did bad things. Don't do it again. Not really effective, right? And say, well, okay, I'm going to go down to the embassy of country B and protest. And basically, that got you a nightstick over the head and a night in jail. And then you said, okay, I'm going to take all of my life savings out of a bank, and I'm going to go to country B, and I'm going to blow up a building. Now, generally, that didn't turn out so well. Often you blew yourself up, or you got nailed by the security forces in the other country, or even if you managed to take out a building, 500 people down, 44 million to go, yeah. And then came the internet, and now all of a sudden the environment changed, right? Basically, the potential for large-scale damage was there. The opportunity not to get caught, very low chance of getting apprehended. All sorts of things that sort of led to the idea that, social scientists for decades have studied the power relationship between people and nation states. And it's always been Godzilla versus Bambi. Basically, nation state wins. But now, perhaps, for the first time in history, an individual could effectively attack a nation state. And that's part of where this third epic of cyber terror came from. Sorry, long answer.
No, that's a
great
response. Yeah. One thing that keeps popping into my mind is that we're talking about motivations, but there's almost a separation of the motivation of the individual versus the nation. So when we're talking about motivation, the individual motivation might be financial, right? I need to earn money to take care of my family, so I'm going to work for the United States and be a hacker. So how do we discuss motivations in this context where a lot of these individuals are being given directives, right? Given things to do. Go do this, go find this person, go whatever. If that's not intrinsically part of them, how does that motivation play within this group of people who are essentially being hired to do things that we have historically treated as criminal?
Oh, that's a fabulous question, Taylor. So actually, I put together a taxonomy of 6 motivations: uh, money, ego, entrance to the social group, cause, entertainment, and status, or Mises. You know, the old Tom and Jerry thing, I hate Mises to pieces. And so basically, a malicious online actor is going to be motivated primarily by one of those 6. And so people who are hacking for the government, motivated by cause, right? Other people who are doing ransomware, motivated by money. Some people are motivated by ego. Basically, I'm going to beat the security system. Just watch me do it. So there are a lot of different motivations, but you can generally put them in one of these 6. And it doesn't matter if this individual is a hacker or a cyber criminal or a cyber terrorist. That's the power of theory. They're a malicious online actor. Here are the 6 motivations.
So, how do you see the civilian cyber warrior in incidents like we have now between, say, Israel and Hamas, or Ukraine and Russia? What are some good examples that we can point to of the civilian being incorporated into these broader conflicts between countries?
Well, you see that in both conflicts. You see it in Ukraine, where not only Ukrainians getting into the act, attacking Russian targets, but there are a lot of overseas people, people in the U.S. and people in other countries that are basically joining in the act, basically attacking Russian critical infrastructure. You see similar stuff in Israel and Hamas, more website defacement and things like that. But in Ukraine, those are serious dudes. Basically, they're getting more into serious hacking and critical infrastructure. So we're seeing a fair amount of it, and we're going to see more of it, I think.
So you've done a fair bit of work on deception as well. How does deception fit into the hacker toolkit? We talked about the social dynamics. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Oh, yeah, deception. Well, we did that book, Deception in a Digital Age. That was a lot of fun. And it's very interesting. In the old days, in the bad old days, before we had, video and audio and even the images, you had bulletin board systems, right? And so people would sit there and log onto a bulletin board system and type some text or send a text file or something. And you had these communications back and forth, but it was a very low bandwidth, just text. And in very low bandwidth situations, it's a lot easier to deceive people because those cues are not there. So when I was at Stanford, I ran the social psych lab there, and we did a lot of studies on verbal and nonverbal cues. And face-to-face, or if you got video like we have here, now you've got all these verbal and nonverbal cues to help you figure out whether the individual is being deceptive or not. It's pretty interesting.
So how does deception fit into that context of magic? You talked about magic being part of that first epoch of hacking. How does that fit in here?
That's fabulous. Cameron and I did that first chapter in the book that talks about magic. And magic is deception. It's basically, there are all sorts of different things. So there's sleight of hand, there's deception of focus, there's a whole slug of magicians' techniques and tools that not only apply to magic on the stage, but can also be applied online. And that's one of the reasons why that book chapter is there, because they're so effective. They really dig deeply into the psychology of people and perception and how you lead them astray.
Mm-hmm. And I think an issue that I think of when we talk about deception is misinformation and disinformation, right? And we know that that's been leveraged by state actors. And I know that's kind of adjacent to what you look at specifically, but how much of a threat do you think that is in terms of like the social warfare?
Oh, It's incredible. Now, information, disinformation, not my area of expertise. However, what I tell people, and I tell my students often is, hey, look, Russia spends hundreds of billions of dollars on weapons in the military. But they spent like chump change, like $10 million to basically use a disinformation campaign to change the direction and the strategic strategy of the U.S. in the 2016 election. I just said the ROI on that was insane.
That's a good way to put it.
That's an interesting way to put it, but yeah, for sure.
That's 100% true. And to what extent do you think that we can differentiate the disinformation and misinformation actors from the hackers? Because realistically, they both influence behavior in different ways. It's almost like the sort of dime aspect of diplomatic versus economic kinds of actions that a nation state can take. Should we think of hackers in the same vein as we do the troll farms that are manufacturing content?
I think there's similarities, but there are also differences, I think. You know, basically the hackers and disinformation and deception, these are very short-term projects. Basically, get your money and you're gone, right? And basically you move on to someone else. Whereas Russia and China have these huge decade-long information disinformation campaigns that have very long-term goals rather than very short-term ones.
Talking about these things that have huge national, global impacts, clearly the government has a role in that. Is there a role of private sector? Is there a role of companies and private cybersecurity professionals?
Well, yeah, of course. And, well, there's even a role for business folks who basically want to encourage you to, you know, buy this particular product or think a certain way or go to this specific spot. But, yeah, I think the roles really depend on that. And the government, you know, well, I think we had a disinformation structure in place until very recently for some reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of sad to say, but it's really, it's incredibly powerful, especially when you're looking at hybrid warfare, where you're basically pushing that along with kinetic stuff. So, yeah.
So one thing that keeps popping into my mind is the term globalization and the fact that the internet has allowed us to expand all of this so greatly. And so if you don't mind just kind of talking about how have you seen the scale change over the years? Because now, you know, me as an entity in Lansing, Michigan can get involved in the conflict in Ukraine because of the internet. So how have we seen not only the conflicts, but the social movements surrounding them kind of change on that scale?
That's a great question. And the answer is, yeah, in the very early days of the hacking community, it was very sort of enclosed. You had a small circle of hacking friends and et cetera, social exchanges back and forth. And then, of course, hacking conventions came along, and that had a tremendous change, social change in the hacking community. And then basically now you can reach all over the world. And now you have organizations like Anonymous, which is still around, and how they operate. And you have other information channels like 4chan and all sorts of other things where there are all sorts of things you can get started with. Now, I make my students study the cult of the dead cow. And basically, that's where the word hacktivism came from. It came from those guys. Even though they were, you know, kind of performance artists, they were really, really good hackers. And understanding the hacking community and those early relationships is actually really important to understanding how it evolved and how that affects things like national security today.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me when you watch the Cult of the Dead Cow release party for the back orifice malware. They're just throwing CDs into the crowd. It's really an interesting phenomena to observe. So I would encourage you, when you're done watching the podcast, to hop over and do some looking for DEF CON Cult of the Dead Cow, because that's fun.
It's the official DEF CON documentary, and we go through it slowly, piece by piece, and talk about it. And actually, Tom, if you watch it carefully, you'll see a friend of ours in that. Oh, yeah. I won't tell you who it is. He's a HoneyNet project member, and he's in there. He looks a lot younger, but he's on there for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. So watch it. You'll see him if you'll recognize him.
So, given that you come at hacking from a social science perspective, what do people tend to respond to when you're talking to them, whether it's on the technical side or some of the stuff you've done with military, law enforcement? What always surprises people when you dig in the social part?
Well, let me tell you a bit of a sad story that goes with that, I think. And that is, during the very, very early years of the HoneyNet project, we did what I call the Spookapalooza tour. Basically, we hit the different IC agencies to talk about what we were doing and things like that. And in the audience were all of these software engineers, computer scientists, data analysts, data architecture guys. And the first couple of talks that I did to this audience, I bombed like a stand-up comic with a bad routine. I said, "Oh, geez, this is not going well." I looked out the audience, and they were just kind of like, and I said, "I have to do something if I'm going to reach these people. How do I do that?" And so I said, "I'm going to invent a story." And so I did. And so the third time I went out for a talk, I got out there, and before I even started talking about stuff, I said, "Let me tell you a story. Imagine that you work at a secret government agency," and often they did. And then over the weekend, you had some classified documents exfiltrated out of your servers, and they're gone, right? And the guy, I see the heads nodding in the audience, yeah, And I go, "Well, maybe yes, maybe no. It depends on the motivation of the person who took, or group that took the documents. If their motivation was cause, you're toast. It's going to show up, in Pastebin, New York Times, and some hostile security services, Postbin. But if it's status, for example, that's a different story, because now they have these documents. These documents, they have status value. If you disclose them, you burn that status value. It gives you status, but that secret's out, and it's no longer the case. And so you might have this small window of time from the time that it was stolen, while the hacker sort of sits on it like a carrot and reads through it and thinks about it and things like that, before they actually disclose any of it. You have that amount of time to take your forensics team and go find it and get it back. A good example is Snowden. So if you look at Snowden, the classic motivation is, a whistleblower, cause, basically he's, out there. But if you look at his behaviors, what you see is he took the information and he parceled it out, little piece by little piece by little piece. That is a status behavior. That is not a cause or whistleblower behavior. And that's really important, because if you're an intelligence service and you want to understand him and perhaps figure out how to get him back somehow, you need to understand what his motivations were, what his mindset is, what's going through his head. So these are actually really key important things that can be useful.
So I know with the hacking community with networks, right, a lot of the getting involved with it comes from the social learning aspect. I'm going to learn how to do something because you tell me how to do it, or you provide me a document that has the code I need to get started. And so how much of this nation state hacking is being impacted by formally educated individuals who have technical skills versus people who kind of learn from the street, so to speak, from other hackers?
What a great question. Now, in the old days in the hacking community, it was a lot of off the street, face-to-face social learning, mentor-mentee kinds of relationships. However, as computer science programs fired up at the universities, suddenly you've got these university-trained folks with a lot of theory, on algorithms and all sorts of other stuff. And so that's really sort of changed the nature of the hacking community to a great extent. Yep.
How do you see AI factoring into all of this moving forward? Like, as an example, if you can have AI write your code for you, then what do you really need as a hacker? Where's your competencies coming in?
Well, AI presents some incredible sort of benefits in terms of like, oh, I'm not really a coder, but I need to get this thing done. Boom. Okay. Mechanically, it gets done. Everybody's happy. But also, AI presents some very serious national security challenges in terms of developing exploits and hacking and deep fakes. And there are a lot of serious pathways that I'm quite concerned about from a national security perspective.
So, thinking critically, you've been doing this for a long time. What do you think is the one thing that people still don't fundamentally understand when we talk about the behavioral dynamics of hacking? Like, if we had to create a behavioral profile of a hacker, is it really all that different than it was in 2001, or are we talking functionally different actor?
The state of the science of understanding hacker mindset in 2001 was horrifyingly bad, full of stereotypes, full of myths. To this day, I hate that stupid picture of the hacker in the hoodie. It's just like, no, nobody does that. Why are you doing that? It's and for years and years, my mission has always been to basically try and get folks in the national security community to go, you know what? It's really important to understand the motivations of these individuals. That's really key. And it's been it's been a tough sell for decades, but in more recent years it's not been quite so tough sell, and even in the corporate arena where you have threat hunters. So we're seeing people turn around. Don't have to convince people quite so hard that perhaps you should understand that, somewhere, if you follow the kill chain up far enough, you're going to find a person with motivations and objectives, right?
Since the HoneyNet project incorporates people from FIRSTs and from CERTs, the sort of computer incident response teams and the very technical side of things, how well do you think they understand the aspects that you're bringing in? Like, is this a functional part of their response, or how would you factor it in?
They get it. And they get it because I get them. And I try to communicate it in a way that they get it. And so for them, they're really insanely smart folks. And if you present them with some novel perspective at looking at the world that they haven't seen before, they go, oh, that's interesting. That's cool. I get this. I understand that. So in terms of internally from inside the HoneyNet project, it's been, actually not as difficult.
One of the things I still remember is the first time I went to DEF CON, I was looking at the program. This was 2004 or 2003. I can't remember which. Anyway, I'm there. I see this thing in the program, and I read it as nose break. And I was like, oh, I wonder what nose break is about. And my own dyslexia sort of kicking in as I was looking at it. When I went to it, it was no CBEC. But I didn't understand any of that because I wasn't technically inclined at the time. And come to find out, oh, it's members of the HoneyNet project talking about CBEC as a tool and why it's important. I just remember thinking, wow, there's so much I don't know about the technical dynamics of this issue I'm interested in. And that, I think, is something that I always struggle with trying to communicate to students, is that, yes, we can get you the social understanding of this, but there's aspects of it that you're going to have to come to as well. You don't have to understand it all, but you have to get the fundamentals. And that can sometimes be a big challenge. But it's nice to hear at least that the other way around, you're getting that connection point. That seems to me to be the biggest issue of all time, is trying to make sure we're speaking the same language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that technical foundation is really, really important to understand the social side as well. I get a lot of MSIT cybersecurity folks in my national security courses, and their eyes kind of get big when I start talking about this stuff and go, oh, I kind of get that, you know? And that's really the mission. You want to not only educate the folks on the tech side, but you want to put the tech into the social science guys. I remember years and years ago, some scary unnamed official called me up one day and said, hey, you know, we're trying to figure out, you know, how many people who are social scientists interested in cyber that also have technical skills. And I said, well, sadly, I can probably count them on two hands, you know, and I named them off, which is probably a mistake, but I did. But now, you know, it's much better than it used to be. That's for sure.
Do you think as a society and as a nation in the US, we have a responsibility to train individuals better, considering they're gonna touch critical infrastructure at some point? Like it's growing so fast that these important, you know, components of our society are being affected by people who just don't have these basic skills. So how can we get to them? How can we provide them enough to protect ourselves?
I mean, you really got to start early in high school or junior high, and actually UTSA has programs like that. There are a lot of programs in the UTSA, even in the elementary school, middle school, and high school, with cyber programs, and that really just gives them a foundation and gives them an idea. It's like, oh, maybe I should, you know, this is kind of interesting and it might be kind of important to me personally and also important to society. I should probably learn a bit more about this stuff.
Yeah, we have an online master's program here as well in cyber, and we're adding a new undergraduate concentration in cyber as well. And we're very excited about it. But it's one of the things that I imagine you might not run into this quite as much, but one issue that we've observed over time, whether it's at the undergrad level or the grad level, is that sort of gap that we get in the social sciences where there are students who are very technical and already understand these basics, and so they get a little bored of the basics. Then you have the students who have no clue about those basics, and so you're trying to pitch up the middle, and inevitably you wind up with no group being entirely satisfied, but you just got to get everybody up on the same page.
Yeah, that's actually a really tough problem in those programs. And, you know, sometimes you can create tracks, for example. Sometimes you can produce special projects. Sometimes you'll shove them off onto faculty members who are doing research, so they learn there as well. You know, I'm looking at UTSA that they have a fairly decent respect and some research in the cybersecurity department for human stuff. In fact, and UTSA is one of the top cybersecurity departments in the country. So that's a happy thing, and it's really unusual.
Mm-hmm. I think something that when I'm teaching those classes with that population, the one thing that I'll be happy if they take away is that cyber is in everything. You can't engage with anything, you know, formal systems, criminal justice system, anything without touching on digital evidence, online interaction, human-computer interaction. And I think that assumption is something that is really important to integrate.
Yeah, and I think actually one of the effective ways to do that, I think, and I try to do that in my courses, is video, where they basically they see things. They see some national security expert talking about something. They see DEF CON documentary. They see talking about the pipeline takeover, all sorts of other things. I think those are really key important points to help bring it home. It makes it alive for them, and I think that's really important, because otherwise I sit there and I wave my hands, you know, blah, 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 point at the PowerPoint slide, and go, da, da, da. But you're missing that excitement, the same kind of excitement that hackers feel when basically they understand something. I say, oh, cool, I got it to do this, or I understand how it works. You need to generate that same excitement and energy in your students for the social side.
That is so incredibly important. And I know I struggle with it, because when you try to bring tech in the room, eyes glaze over and they don't want to deal with it. But so in wrapping up, we try to ask everyone this same question. thinking about your experiences, thinking about what we've talked about today, if you could give a piece of advice to the average listener, the average person that probably doesn't have a whole lot of technical skills, what is the takeaway from this conversation that they should hone in on?
Well, I think we just kind of sort of touched on it, and that is the more you understand about just basic foundational things about cyber and digital networks and how they affect you and how they're everywhere, the bigger your world gets and the more you understand the critical key part that cyber plays in it. And that if you don't learn these things, you're going to be out in the cold. You're just really not going to understand your world. And that's a citizen you don't want. You want an informed, knowledgeable citizen that understands some of the issues, even at just a very basic foundational level.
I couldn't agree more. It seems like we're at a point in time where it's just the computer or the iPad or whatever comes out of the box and it works immediately, and I need to know nothing.
That's kind of sad. Yeah. The only upside to that is for some people who are curious, they're going to go, oh, how did this work? Oh, let me look at this. Oh, this is a real cool program. Oh, how do digital networks work? Oh, bingo. So there is that positive part that you're going to grab part of that intellectually curious audience and suck them in. But for the rest of the folks, they're going to watch Fonzie on their iPad.
Well, Max, it was so good to talk to you. It's been a while, and I'm glad we got a chance to catch up. We'd love to have you back on because we could talk about hackers and deception and everything else all day on here. So Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Invite me back whenever you want. This has been a lot of fun. Nice to meet you, Rachel. Nice to meet you, Taylor. Nice to see you again, Tom.
Oh, yeah, we're glad to have you. And thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to catching up with you the next time we cross the firewall. Thanks for listening to the Crossing the Firewall podcast. This is a production of the Center for Cybercrime Investigation and Training in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, produced by J.J. Thomas. The thoughts and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and the guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the university. If you have a comment or a question about the show, please email us at crossingthefirewall@gmail.com. Also, make sure that you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn for more information. And if you're enjoying us on your favorite podcast app, please make sure that you like the show and leave us a review so that way everybody knows what we're up to. And if you're listening in on YouTube, make sure that you like us and subscribe so that way you're staying up to date on everything that is Crossing the Firewall.